The blistering Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as Gabriella Ellis clutched the empty canteen to her chest, tears stinging her eyes as she stumbled forward along the dusty trail leading to Tucson. 3 days ago, she had been traveling with purpose and possessions. Now she had nothing but the torn dress on her back and the crushing weight of desperation in her heart. It was 1878, and the journey west had promised Gabriella a fresh start after the death of her parents in Philadelphia. At 22, she had sold everything to purchase passage on a stagecoach bound for Tucson, Arizona territory, where her father's old business partner had offered her work as a schoolteacher. The stagecoach had been attacked 2 days outside of town by bandits wearing flour sack masks who'd taken everything: her trunk of clothes, her money, her food and water, even the locket containing her mother's portrait. The driver and guard had been killed, and the other passengers scattered. Left alone on the trail, Gabriella had been walking ever since, growing weaker by the hour. The late afternoon heat shimmered across the desert landscape as Gabriella's legs finally gave out. She collapsed to her knees, the parched ground hard beneath her. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her once fine blue traveling dress now torn and filthy. Death in this desolate place seemed inevitable. "Madam, you all right there?" The voice startled her so badly she nearly toppled over. A tall figure on horseback materialized through her hazy vision, the sun at his back casting him in silhouette. "Water," she managed to croak, her voice barely audible. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion and approached cautiously, leading a magnificent chestnut horse. As he drew closer, Gabriella could make out his features: a strong jawline covered with several days' worth of stubble, sun-weathered skin, and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners as he knelt beside her. "Here you go," he said, uncorking a canteen and holding it to her lips. "Small sips now. Too much too fast will make you sick." Gabriella did as instructed, though it took all her willpower not to grab the canteen and drain it. The water was warm but felt like heaven sliding down her parched throat. "Quinn Dawson," the man said, studying her with concern. "Most folks call me Quinn." "Gabriella Ellis," she managed after a few more careful sips. "The stagecoach. Robbed. They took everything." Quinn nodded grimly. "Stagecoach to Tucson. Heard about that. They found the driver and shotgun rider yesterday." He looked her over with newfound respect. "You've been walking for 2 days in this heat." "3, she corrected weakly. He whistled low. "That's something, Miss Ellis. Not many could manage that." He glanced at the setting sun. "Night's coming. My camp's not far. Can you stand?" When Gabriella attempted to rise, her legs buckled beneath her. Without hesitation, Quinn scooped her up as if she weighed nothing and placed her on his horse. He grabbed the reins and led the animal on foot. "It's not much further," he assured her. "Just hold on." True to his word, they arrived at a small camp nestled between rock formations that provided some shelter from the elements. A small fire pit, a bedroll, and saddlebags constituted his worldly possessions. It wasn't much, but to Gabriella it looked like paradise. Quinn helped her down and settled her near the fire he quickly built. From his saddlebags, he produced jerky, hardtack, and a tin of beans. "It's not fancy dining," he said with an apologetic smile, "but it'll keep you going." As Gabriella ate small bites of food, Quinn busied himself setting up a second bedroll, his own, for her to use. She watched him move efficiently around the camp, his tall frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. There was something reassuring about his quiet competence. "You're giving me your bedroll?" she asked, her voice stronger now that she'd had water and food. "Can't very well let a lady sleep on the hard ground," he replied, not meeting her eyes as he adjusted the blanket. "I've slept on worse than dirt plenty of times." "Thank you," she said, the simple words utterly inadequate for what his kindness meant to her. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Quinn finally looked at her, his expression serious. "No need to think on that. You're safe now." As night fell completely, the temperature dropped rapidly, and Gabriella shivered despite the fire and blanket. Quinn noticed immediately and removed his coat, draping it over her shoulders without comment before returning to his place on the other side of the fire. "Where are you headed?" Gabriella asked after a while. "Tucson, same as you, I reckon. Got some business with the cattle broker there." He poked at the fire with a stick. "What brings a fine lady like yourself out to this rough country?" Gabriella explained about her teaching position and the promise of a new start. As she talked, the events of the past 3 days caught up with her, and tears welled in her eyes despite her efforts to hold them back. "I've lost everything," she concluded. "My parents' belongings, my savings, my clothes, everything I had in the world." Quinn listened without interruption, his face thoughtful in the firelight. When she finished, he said simply, "You've still got your life and your education. That's more than many out here start with." His matter-of-fact assessment strangely comforted her. There was no pity in his voice, just a calm certainty that she could and would persevere. "We'll reach Tucson by tomorrow afternoon if we ride double," he continued. "I know some good folks there who might help you get settled until you can contact this business partner of your father's." "I can't impose on you further," Gabriella protested weakly. Quinn's laugh was soft and genuine. "Madam, out here, helping folks in need isn't an imposition. It's how we all survive." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small bundle which he handed to her. "Got a spare shirt if you want something clean to sleep in. It'll be big, but it might be more comfortable than that torn dress." Gabriella accepted the offering, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson." "Quinn," he corrected. "Get some rest, Miss Ellis. We've got a fair piece to ride tomorrow." When she was certain Quinn had turned his back to give her privacy, Gabriella quickly changed into his offered shirt. The soft, worn cotton smelled of soap and open air and fell nearly to her knees. She slipped beneath the blanket of his bedroll, exhaustion overwhelming her. Just before sleep claimed her, she watched Quinn through half-closed eyes as he sat vigilant by the fire, his rifle across his knees, keeping watch. In this wild, dangerous territory, he had shared everything he had with a stranger. As Gabriella drifted into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in days, she wondered about the kind of man who would do such a thing. Morning arrived with a soft golden light that turned the desert beautiful. Gabriella awoke to find coffee brewing over a small fire and Quinn returning from somewhere with a handful of prickly pears. "Good morning," he said, noticing she was awake. "Hope you slept well. Coffee's almost ready and these aren't much, but they're sweet and juicy." He held up the fruits. Gabriella sat up, suddenly conscious of her appearance. She must look a fright with her hair tangled and wearing nothing but his shirt, but Quinn didn't seem to notice or care. "I slept wonderfully, thank you," she said, accepting a mug of strong black coffee. She watched as Quinn expertly removed the spines from the prickly pears and sliced them open to reveal the crimson flesh inside. "It's not exactly breakfast at the Palmer house," he said with a self-deprecating smile, "but it'll do until we reach town." As they ate, Gabriella studied her rescuer in the clear morning light. He was perhaps 30, with sandy brown hair that curled slightly where it was too long at the collar. His face was tanned from outdoor life, with laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though she had yet to see him do so fully. He wore simple, practical clothes, worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and scuffed boots that had clearly seen many miles. "Have you been in Arizona Territory long?" she asked. Quinn nodded. "About 5 years. Came out after the war seemed like a good place to start fresh. He didn't elaborate on which war, but Gabriella suspected he meant the war between the states. If so, he would have been quite young when he fought, and before that, Texas, he replied. Family had a small ranch outside of San Antonio, lost it during the war. His tone was matter-of-fact, without self-pity. What about you? I gather Philadelphia wasn't home your whole life. Gabriella was surprised by his perception. No, we lived in Boston until I was 16. Father's business took us to Philadelphia after that. They talked easily as they broke camp, Quinn telling her about life in the territory and what to expect in Tucson. When it came time to mount up, he helped her onto his horse before swinging up behind her. Sorry for the close quarters, he said, his voice suddenly gruff. It's the only way we'll both fit. Gabriella was acutely aware of his chest against her back, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins. No man had ever been this close to her before, and propriety demanded she be scandalized. Instead, she felt safe. They rode through the morning, the landscape gradually changing as they approached Tucson. Occasionally, Quinn would point out landmarks or share stories about the area. He was knowledgeable but humble, and Gabriella found herself enjoying his company despite the circumstances that had brought them together. By midday, they stopped at a small stream to rest the horse and eat some of the remaining jerky. May I ask you something, Quinn? Gabriella ventured as they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree. Of course. Why did you help me? You could have just given me water and pointed me toward town. Quinn was quiet for a long moment, contemplating the horizon. My ma raised me to believe you don't pass by someone in need when you have the means to help, even if those means are limited. He glanced at her. Besides, what kind of man would I be if I left a lady alone in the desert? His simple answer touched her deeply. In Philadelphia, people walked past beggars every day without a second glance. Out here, where life was harder but perhaps clearer in its demands, there seemed to be a different code. Well, I'm grateful, she said softly. More than I can say. Quinn looked slightly uncomfortable with her gratitude. We should get moving if we want to reach town before dark, he said, standing and offering his hand to help her up. They continued their journey, the town of Tucson finally appearing on the horizon in the late afternoon. As they drew closer, Gabriella felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. She was about to begin a new life with nothing to her name except the borrowed shirt on her back. Quinn seemed to sense her apprehension. First stop will be Mrs. Hendrick's boarding house, he said. She's a good woman, takes in newcomers and those down on their luck. She can put you up until you get settled. I have no money, Gabriella reminded him, embarrassed by her circumstances. I'll cover it, Quinn said simply. You can pay me back when you're on your feet. Before she could protest, he added, and after that we'll find this business partner of your father's. What was his name? Samuel Weber. He owns the Mercantile, according to his letters. Quinn nodded. I know of him, decent man by all accounts. Tucson was larger than Gabriella had expected, with adobe buildings lining the main street alongside more traditional wooden structures. People of various backgrounds moved about their business: Mexican farmers, Chinese workers, well-dressed businessmen, and cowboys like Quinn. It was a far cry from the refined streets of Philadelphia, but there was energy to the place that spoke of opportunity and growth. They stopped in front of a tidy two-story building with a small sign that read, Hendrick's Boarding House. Quinn helped Gabriella dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a brief moment, they stood close, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, that their journey together was ending. The moment was broken by the opening of the front door. A stout woman with gray streaked hair and a kind face appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. Quinn Dawson, as I live and breathe, she exclaimed. "Didn't expect to see you in town for another month at least." "Hello, Mrs. Hendricks," Quinn said, removing his hat respectfully. "I've brought someone who needs a place to stay. This is Miss Gabriella Ellis. She was on the stagecoach that was robbed." Mrs. Hendricks' expression immediately softened. "You poor dear, come in right away." She ushered Gabriella toward the door, then turned back to Quinn. "You too, young man. You look like you could use a proper meal." Inside, the boarding house was clean and modestly furnished, with a sitting room off to one side and a dining room beyond. Delicious smells wafted from what must be the kitchen at the rear of the house. "Martha," Mrs. Hendricks called, and a young maid appeared. "Please prepare the room at the end of the hall upstairs for Miss Ellis, and bring up the copper tub and hot water." She turned to Gabriella. "First thing you need is a good bath and some clean clothes. I keep spares for emergencies, and though they may not fit perfectly, they'll do until we can get you properly outfitted." Quinn hung back awkwardly, hat in hand. "I should be going, madam. Need to see to my horse and my business in town." "Nonsense," Mrs. Hendricks declared. "You'll stay for supper at least. It's nearly ready, and I won't hear of you leaving without a proper meal after bringing this young lady safely to town." Gabriella felt a surge of relief that Quinn wouldn't disappear from her life quite yet. "Please stay," she added. "I'd like to thank you properly." He hesitated, then nodded. "I'll just see to my horse first, if that's all right." While Quinn tended to his horse, Mrs. Hendricks showed Gabriella to a small but comfortable room upstairs. Soon, a copper tub filled with steaming water awaited her, along with a simple but clean dress, undergarments, and even a hairbrush and pins. Quinn explained what happened, Mrs. Hendricks said as she laid out the items. "Don't you worry about payment just yet. Any friend of Quinn's is welcome here." "He's been very kind," Gabriella said, "though we only just met yesterday. He shared everything he had with me, food, water, even his bedroll." Mrs. Hendricks smiled knowingly. "That sounds like Quinn. He doesn't have much, but what he has, he shares." She patted Gabriella's hand. "Take your time with the bath, dear. Dinner won't be for another hour." Left alone, Gabriella sank gratefully into the hot water, letting it wash away the dust and trauma of the past days. As she scrubbed her skin clean, she reflected on the remarkable turn her fortunes had taken. Yesterday, she had been certain she would die alone in the desert. Today, she was safe in Tucson, thanks to the kindness of a stranger. By the time she descended the stairs, feeling human again in the borrowed dress with her hair neatly arranged, Quinn had returned. He'd obviously taken the opportunity to clean up as well. His face was freshly shaved, his hair damp, and he wore a clean shirt. He stood when she entered the sitting room, and for a moment he simply stared at her, something unreadable in his expression. "You look better," he finally said, then winced at his own words. "I mean, you look well, rested." Gabriella smiled, oddly charmed by his awkwardness. "Thank you. I feel much better." Mrs. Hendricks announced dinner, and they moved to the dining room where several other boarders had gathered. Quinn pulled out Gabriella's chair for her, a gesture that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance but somehow perfectly in character. Over a hearty meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie, Gabriella learned more about her rescuer. The other boarders clearly knew and respected him, and through their conversation, she discovered he worked as a trail guide and occasional cattle driver, taking herds between ranches and to the railroad at Benson. He lived mostly on the trail but kept a small cabin outside of town where he stayed between jobs. After dinner, Quinn reluctantly announced he needed to leave. "I've got an early meeting with the cattle broker tomorrow," he explained. Gabriella walked with him to the door, suddenly uncertain what to say. How did one properly thank a man for saving one's life? "I don't know how I'll ever repay you," she began, but Quinn shook his head. "There's nothing to repay, Miss Ellis." "Gabriella," she corrected him. "Please, after everything, I think you should call me Gabriella." A small smile tugged at his lips. "Gabriella, then." He placed his hat on his head. "I'll come by tomorrow afternoon if that's all right. We can go to Weber's Mercantile together." "I'd appreciate that very much," she said, relieved that she would see him again. He nodded, hesitated as if he might say something more, then simply touched the brim of his hat and walked away into the gathering dusk. Gabriella watched him go, a strange mix of emotions swirling within her. In the space of 24 hours, this man had become vitally important to her, and not just because he had saved her life. There was something about Quinn Dawson that intrigued her: his quiet strength, his unassuming kindness, the hints of a past that had shaped him into the man he was today. As she closed the door, Mrs. Hendricks appeared beside her. "He's a good man," the older woman said softly. "One of the best I know." "Yes," Gabriella agreed. "I believe he is." The next morning, Gabriella borrowed paper and pen from Mrs. Hendricks to write to her aunt in Philadelphia, explaining what had happened and assuring her that she had arrived safely in Tucson, though without her possessions. She also penned a note to Samuel Weber, intending to deliver it when she met with Quinn later. After a breakfast of eggs and biscuits, she ventured onto the porch of the boarding house, taking in the bustling activity of Tucson in daylight. The town was a curious blend of cultures: Mexican, American, and native influences visible in the architecture, the dress of passers-by, and the goods displayed in shop windows. First time in Tucson, Gabriella turned to find a well-dressed woman of about 40 joining her on the porch. She had introduced herself at dinner the previous night as Margaret Foster, a widow who taught music to the children of Tucson's more prosperous families. "Yes, though not quite how I planned to arrive," Gabriella admitted. "Mrs. Hendricks mentioned your ordeal. How fortunate that Mr. Dawson found you when he did." Margaret gave her a sympathetic smile. "Tucson can be a wonderful place once you get used to its peculiarities. I came here from Boston 5 years ago and haven't regretted it for a moment." "Boston." "I lived there until I was 16, Gabriella said, delighted to find someone from her former home. They spent the morning in pleasant conversation, with Margaret offering insights about the town and its residents. According to her, Samuel Weber was indeed a respected businessman who had established the largest mercantile in the territory. He was known for fair dealings and had been instrumental in bringing the first schoolhouse to Tucson. Around midday, Margaret excused herself for a music lesson, and Gabriella returned to her room to prepare for Quinn's arrival. She had just finished pinning her hair when Mrs. Hendricks called up that she had a visitor. Quinn stood in the foyer, hat in hand, looking somewhat uncomfortable in the indoor setting. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His clothes were neat, his boots polished, and he'd trimmed his hair. "Miss Ellis," he said formally, then catching himself, "Gabriella, you look well." "As do you, Quinn, and thank you again for coming." They walked together down the main street, Quinn slightly shortening his long stride to match hers. He told her about his meeting with the cattle broker that morning, a successful negotiation that would keep him employed for the next few months taking herds north. "Will you leave Tucson soon, then?" Gabriella asked, surprised by how much the thought troubled her. "Not for a few weeks," he replied. "There's preparation to be done first." They arrived at Weber's Mercantile, an impressive establishment with large display windows and a wide porch. Inside, shelves lined the walls stocked with everything from canned goods to tools, fabric to firearms. A portly man with impressive mutton chop whiskers approached them. "Quinn Dawson, good to see you, sir. What brings you in today, Mr. Weber?" Quinn greeted him. I've brought someone who's been looking for you. This is Miss Gabriella Ellis." Samuel Weber's eyebrows shot up. "Ellis? Not Edward Ellis's daughter?" "Yes, sir," Gabriella confirmed. "My father wrote to you about a teaching position." Weber's face fell. "My dear, we've been worried sick. Your stagecoach was due 3 days ago, and when news of the robbery reached us." He clasped her hands in his. "But here you are, safe and sound, though I understand you lost everything in the robbery." "Yes, unfortunately. Mr. Dawson found me on the trail and brought me to town." Weber looked at Quinn with new respect. "Then we owe you a debt of gratitude, sir." He turned back to Gabriella. "Your father was one of my dearest friends, Miss Ellis. I was heartbroken to hear of his passing. When your letter arrived asking about opportunities here, I was delighted to help his daughter." He led them to his office at the back of the store, where he explained that the teaching position was still available, with accommodations included in the schoolhouse's adjoining quarters. "School doesn't start for another 3 weeks, which should give you time to settle in," Weber said. "And as for your lost possessions, please consider it my welcome gift to outfit you with the necessities." He waved away her protests. "I insist. Edward would never forgive me if I didn't look after his daughter properly." Quinn remained quiet during this exchange, but Gabriella was acutely aware of his presence, solid and reassuring beside her. After finalizing the details with Weber, who insisted they start by selecting fabric for new dresses right away, Quinn excused himself. "I have some errands to run," he said, "but I'll walk you back to Mrs. Hendricks later if you'd like." "I would, thank you," Gabriella replied, surprised by how reluctant she was to see him go, even temporarily. For the next 2 hours, she was swept up in the generosity of Samuel Weber, who insisted she select not just fabric for dresses but ready-made items as well, undergarments, stockings, a shawl, and even a bonnet. He introduced her to Mrs. Ramirez, the local seamstress who promised to have 2 dresses completed within the week. By the time Quinn returned, Gabriella was somewhat overwhelmed by it all. The reality of her new life was finally taking shape, and with it came both excitement and trepidation. "Everything settled?" Quinn asked as they left the mercantile, several parcels tucked under his arm that he had insisted on carrying for her. "Yes, Mr. Weber has been extraordinarily kind," she said, explaining the arrangements. "I can move into the schoolhouse quarters next week, once they've been prepared." They walked slowly back toward the boarding house, taking a slightly longer route that allowed Quinn to point out various establishments she might need to know: the bank, the post office, the doctor's home and office. "And that's the Copper Nugget Saloon," he said, nodding toward a large building with swinging doors. "Best avoided by respectable ladies, though the owner, Frank Davis, is a decent sort." As if summoned by his name, a man emerged from the saloon at that moment. He was expensively dressed in a black suit with a gold watch chain visible across his vest. "Dawson," he called, a wide smile breaking across his face. "Just the man I wanted to see." Quinn tensed almost imperceptibly beside Gabriella. "Davis," he acknowledged with a nod. "What can I do for you?" "Word is you've signed on with Hollister to take his herd north," Davis said, approaching them. His gaze shifted to Gabriella and he removed his hat. "Forgive my manners, miss. Frank Davis at your service." "Miss Ellis," Quinn said before she could respond, "is the new school teacher. She's just arrived in town." Davis's smile widened. "A school teacher? Well, that's wonderful news. Tucson could use more civilizing influences." He returned his attention to Quinn. "About that cattle drive, I've got a proposition for you. Stop by the saloon later and we'll discuss it." Quinn's face revealed nothing. "I'm afraid I'm already committed to Hollister." Davis waved a dismissive hand. "Hear me out first. I think you'll find my offer more lucrative." With a tip of his hat to Gabriella, he continued on his way. They resumed walking, but Quinn's earlier ease had vanished. "Is something wrong?" Gabriella ventured after a moment of silence. Quinn sighed. "Frank Davis isn't someone I care to do business with. He has a reputation for cutting corners and leaving others to face the consequences. Yet he seems well established in town. Money talks, especially in places like Tucson." Quinn's expression softened as he glanced at her. "But don't let that worry you. Most folks here are honest and hardworking. They reached the boarding house too soon for Gabriella's liking." She found herself reluctant to end their time together, these moments that seemed stolen from her otherwise chaotic arrival in Tucson. "Would you?" She began hesitantly. "That is, Mrs. Hendricks mentioned a church social tomorrow after services. I was planning to attend to meet more people in town. Perhaps you might be there as well." Something flickered in Quinn's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. "I don't often attend church services," he admitted, "but the socials are good for catching up with folks. I'll be there." His simple acceptance made her unreasonably happy. "Wonderful. I'll look forward to it." That evening over dinner, Gabriella found herself the center of attention as the other boarders asked about her journey and plans. She shared the edited version of her ordeal, emphasizing Quinn's rescue rather than the terror of those 3 days alone on the trail. "That Quinn Dawson," remarked Mr. Patterson, an elderly boarder who had once prospected for silver. "He's a steady one. Not like some of these young hotheads who come through town looking for excitement." "He certainly was kind to me," Gabriella agreed. Mrs. Hendricks passed the potatoes with a knowing smile. "Quinn doesn't go out of his way for just anyone, dear. He must have seen something special in you." Gabriella felt her cheeks warm at the implication. "He was simply being a good Samaritan." "Perhaps," Mrs. Hendricks replied, unconvinced. "But I've known that young man for 5 years, and I've never seen him clean up so nice just to escort a lady to the mercantile." Later, alone in her room, Gabriella found herself thinking about Quinn, his quiet strength, his unwavering kindness, the way his eyes crinkled when he almost smiled. It was foolish, she knew, to develop feelings for the first man who had shown her kindness in this new place. Yet there was something about Quinn Dawson that called to her, something that went beyond gratitude for her rescue. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Gabriella dressed carefully in one of her new ready-made outfits, a simple blue dress that complemented her eyes, according to Mrs. Hendricks. She accompanied the landlady and several other boarders to the small white church at the edge of town. The service was different from what she was accustomed to in Philadelphia, less formal, more heartfelt, but the message of community and caring resonated with her. Afterward, tables were set up in the churchyard for the social, laden with food brought by the congregation. Gabriella was introduced to so many people that she feared she would never remember all their names. Everyone was curious about the new schoolteacher, and she found herself repeatedly telling the sanitized version of her journey to Tucson. She was in the middle of a conversation with the mayor's wife when she spotted Quinn at the edge of the gathering. He stood somewhat apart, watching the socializing with a slight smile. He had dressed up for the occasion in a clean white shirt, string tie, and what appeared to be a new vest. Excusing herself, Gabriella made her way toward him, her heart inexplicably racing. "You came," she said simply. "Said I would, didn't I?" His eyes took in her appearance, lingering a moment longer than strictly proper. "Blue suits you." Coming from anyone else, the brief comment might have seemed insufficient, but from Quinn it felt like high praise. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." He actually flushed slightly at that, clearing his throat. "Have you met everyone in town yet? Seems like they're all here today." "Almost, I think. Everyone has been so welcoming." She paused. Would you like some lemonade? Mrs. Hendricks says hers is the best in the territory. They found a relatively quiet spot under a cottonwood tree, lemonade in hand, and watched the social unfold before them. Children played tag between the tables. Couples young and old strolled arm in arm, and the town's residents enjoyed a brief respite from their daily labors. "It's nice," Gabriella observed. "Different from Philadelphia, but nice." "What was it like there?" Quinn asked. "I've never been further east than St. Louis." She described the city as best she could: the cobblestone streets, the grand buildings, the parks and theaters and museums. "It was beautiful in many ways," she concluded, "but very confined, rules for everything and everyone." Quinn considered this. "Too many rules can suffocate a person," he said. "Out here there's more freedom, though it comes with its own kind of hardship." "Is that why you came west?" "For freedom." He was quiet for a moment, contemplating his answer. "Partly. After the war, Texas didn't feel like home anymore. Too many ghosts." He looked out across the churchyard. "Wanted to find a place where a man could build something new, something that wasn't standing on the bones of what came before." "And have you found that place?" His gaze returned to her, thoughtful. "Getting closer every day." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then someone called Quinn's name, breaking the spell. It was Samuel Weber, beckoning him over to where several men were engaged in conversation. "Excuse me," Quinn said reluctantly. "Weber's been trying to get me involved in the town council. Claims they need a younger perspective." Gabriella watched him go, admiring the easy way he carried himself, the respect evident in how the older men greeted him. Despite his apparent preference for solitude, Quinn Dawson was clearly a valued member of the community. She was soon drawn into conversation with several of the town's women, who were curious about Eastern fashions and eager to share local gossip. Through their chatter, Gabriella learned more about Tucson and its residents, including a few tidbits about Quinn. "Such a shame about his family," remarked Mrs. Peterson, the doctor's wife. "Lost his father and 2 brothers in the war, and his mother not long after. Came west all alone. Poor boy." "He never speaks of it," added another woman. "But he's made a good life here. Honest work, respected by all." "And still unmarried," said a third with a meaningful glance at Gabriella, though not for lack of interest from certain quarters. Gabriella found herself unexpectedly jealous at the thought of other women pursuing Quinn, which was ridiculous. She barely knew the man, regardless of how much she owed him. As the social began to wind down, Quinn found her again, offering to walk her back to the boarding house. They strolled slowly through town, neither seeming in a hurry to end the day. "I'll be busy this week," Quinn said as they approached Mrs. Hendricks' porch. "Getting ready for the cattle drive, but I'd like to see you again before I go, if that would be all right." "I'd like that very much," Gabriella replied, perhaps too quickly. "I'm moving into the schoolhouse quarters on Wednesday. Perhaps you could visit once I'm settled," he nodded, a genuine smile finally breaking across his face. "I'd like that." Over the next few days, Gabriella threw herself into preparations for her new role. Samuel Weber introduced her to the school board members and showed her the schoolhouse, a simple but sound building with a comfortable apartment attached consisting of a bedroom, sitting room, and small kitchen. On Wednesday, she moved in with her few new possessions, grateful for the privacy after sharing the boarding house with so many others. Mrs. Ramirez delivered her first completed dress, a lovely green calico that fit perfectly, and promised the second would be ready soon. That evening there was a knock at her door. Quinn stood on her small porch, hat in hand and a package under his arm. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "I brought a housewarming gift." Gabriella invited him in, suddenly conscious of how sparse her new home was. She had a bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a chest of drawers and a rocking chair, but little else to make the place feel inhabited. "It's not much yet," she apologized, "but it's mine." "It's a good start," Quinn said, looking around approvingly. "Solid roof, tight windows. You'll make it home in no time." He handed her the package, watching as she unwrapped it to reveal a small framed painting of the desert landscape at sunset, the mountains purple against a fiery sky. "Quinn, it's beautiful," she breathed, genuinely touched. "Made by a Navajo woman who lives outside town," he explained. "Thought you might like having something to remind you of where you are now, not just where you came from." The thoughtfulness of the gift moved her deeply. "Thank you. It's perfect." They sat at her small table, talking as the light faded outside. Quinn told her more about the upcoming cattle drive, a 3-week journey to the railroad at Benson with over 200 head of cattle. It was dangerous work, he explained, but the pay was good, and he enjoyed the challenge. "Will you come back to Tucson afterward?" she asked, trying to sound merely curious rather than anxious. "That's the plan," he said. "Got my cabin here such as it is, and now—" He hesitated, other reasons to return. The way he looked at her left little doubt as to one of those reasons. Gabriella felt a flutter of excitement mixed with trepidation. She was developing feelings for this man, feelings that went far beyond gratitude, but was it wise? They came from different worlds, had different experiences. And yet, sitting across from him in the gentle lamplight, those differences seemed insignificant compared to the connection she felt forming between them. As the evening drew to a close, Quinn reluctantly rose to leave. "I should go. You need your rest, and I've got an early start tomorrow." At the door, he paused, seeming to struggle with something. Finally, he asked, "Would it be presumptuous of me to write to you while I'm gone? Nothing fancy, just to let you know I'm all right." "I'd like that very much," Gabriella said softly. He studied her face in the lamplight, then, in a gesture that surprised them both, took her hand and gently pressed his lips to her knuckles. "Good night, Gabriella." After he left, she stood at the door for a long moment, her hand still tingling from his touch. She was falling for Quinn Dawson, and falling fast. The realization should have frightened her, she who had always prided herself on her practical nature, but instead, it filled her with a strange, buoyant hope. The next morning, Gabriella was awakened by the sounds of cattle being driven through town. Quinn's herd heading north. She rushed to her window in time to see him riding past, directing the massive animals with practiced ease. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up at her window and raised his hand in farewell. She waved back, watching until he disappeared from view. The following weeks were busy as Gabriella prepared for the start of school. She met with parents, organized teaching materials, and continued settling into her new home. Samuel Weber proved a valuable ally, introducing her to the right people and ensuring she had everything she needed for her classroom. True to his word, Quinn wrote to her. His letters were simple but heartfelt, describing the journey north, the challenges they faced, and always ending with a question about her day or preparations for school. Gabriella treasured these missives, reading them repeatedly and carefully composing her replies. In one letter, dated nearly 2 weeks after his departure, Quinn wrote, "Had trouble at the river crossing yesterday. Lost 2 head to the current, nearly lost one of the boys too. Wilson's only 16, too young for this work really, but he's learning fast. Reminded me that life out here doesn't wait for a person to be ready, it just comes at you, ready or not. Sometimes I think about how I found you on that trail, how close you came to a bad end. Can't help but wonder if it was chance or something more that put me on that particular path at that particular time. Not much for believing in fate, but meeting you has me reconsidering. How are your students shaping up? You mentioned 20 enrolled so far. That's a good number for Tucson. Shows folks here value education, want better for their children than they had themselves. Be back in town next Thursday if all goes well. Would it be too forward to call on you that evening? Gabriella wrote back immediately, assuring him that his call would be most welcome and sharing news of her own preparations. School would start the day after his planned return, and she admitted to being both excited and nervous. The intervening days passed slowly. Gabriella found herself watching the trail north whenever she had a free moment, even though she knew it was too soon for Quinn's return. She told herself it was merely anticipation of news from the cattle drive, but in her heart, she knew it was more. Thursday arrived at last. Gabriella spent the morning arranging her classroom one final time, labeling slates and books for each student. In the afternoon, she bathed and dressed with special care in her new green dress, pinning her hair in a style that was neat but becoming. As evening approached, she found herself pacing her small sitting room, watching the clock with growing concern. Quinn had said he would call on her this evening, but the hour grew late with no sign of him. Just as she was beginning to fear something had gone wrong, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find not Quinn but a young cowboy, hat clutched nervously in his hands. "Miss Ellis?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm Wilson from Mr. Dawson's crew." A cold dread settled in Gabriella's stomach. "Yes, is something wrong? Has something happened to Quinn?" The boy nodded miserably. "There was trouble, madam. Rustlers hit us near the border of the Weber ranch. Mr. Dawson took a bullet. He's alive," he added quickly, seeing the color drain from her face. "Doc Peterson's with him now at Mrs. Hendricks' boarding house. He asked for you and Mrs. Hendricks said I should fetch you right away." Gabriella didn't hesitate. Grabbing her shawl, she followed Wilson through the darkening streets to the boarding house. Mrs. Hendricks met her at the door, her normally cheerful face drawn with worry. "He's upstairs, dear, first room on the right. Doctor's just finished with him." Dr. Peterson was emerging from the room as Gabriella approached. "Ah, Miss Ellis, he's been asking for you. Bullet went clean through his shoulder, painful but not life-threatening if infection doesn't set in. He's lost blood and needs rest, but he's a strong man. I've given him laudanum for the pain, so he may not be entirely coherent." Gabriella nodded her understanding and entered the room. Quinn lay on the bed, his face pale against the white pillowcase, his left shoulder heavily bandaged. He appeared to be sleeping, but his eyes fluttered open as she approached. "Gabriella," he murmured, his voice rough with pain despite the medication. "You came." "Of course I came." She sat carefully on the edge of the bed, taking his uninjured hand in hers. "What happened?" Quinn's eyes darkened. "Rustlers. 6 of them hit us just before sundown. They were after the cattle, but when we fought back." He grimaced, whether from pain or the memory she couldn't tell. "Got 2 of them. Rest ran off, lost 8 head, could have been worse." "You could have been killed," Gabriella said, unable to keep the tremor from her voice, his fingers tightened around hers. "Takes more than some half-bit rustler to put me down." His attempt at humor fell flat as a spasm of pain crossed his face. "You should rest," she said. "The laudanum will help you sleep." "Don't want to sleep," he protested weakly. "Been looking forward to seeing you for weeks." Despite her worry, Gabriella smiled. "I'm not going anywhere, I'll be right here." True to her word, she remained at his bedside as he drifted in and out of consciousness through the night. Mrs. Hendricks brought her tea and a blanket, insisting she at least make herself comfortable in the chair by the bed. In the small hours of the morning, Quinn awoke more lucid, the laudanum having worn off somewhat. He found Gabriella dozing in the chair, her hand still linked with his. "Gabriella," he whispered. She woke immediately, leaning forward to touch his forehead, checking for fever. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been shot," he said with a ghost of a smile, "but better for seeing you." He hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry about your first day of school. Guess I've ruined that." "Don't be ridiculous," she admonished gently. "The school will manage one day without me." "You're more important." The simple declaration hung between them, profound in its honesty. Quinn's eyes, clear now despite his pain, searched her face. "I've been thinking about you every day," he admitted. "Out there on the trail, all I could think about was getting back to Tucson. Back to you." Gabriella felt tears prick her eyes. "I've been thinking about you too, your letters. They meant everything to me." Quinn shifted, wincing as the movement jarred his injured shoulder. "I'm not good with words, Gabriella, never have been, but these past weeks being away from you, it made me realize something." "What's that?" she asked softly, her heart pounding. "That meeting you wasn't just chance. It was the best thing that's ever happened to me." His voice was low, intense despite his weakened state. "I know we haven't known each other long, and I've got little to offer a lady like you," but Gabriella silenced him by leaning forward and gently, briefly pressing her lips to his. It was impulsive, improper, and absolutely perfect. "You have everything to offer," she whispered as she pulled back. "You gave me your water when I was dying of thirst, your food when I was starving, your bedroll when I needed rest, your shirt when I had nothing to wear. You shared everything you had with me, Quinn Dawson. Everything." His good hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch feather light. "And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." Morning found them still talking quietly, sharing stories and hopes and dreams. Dr. Peterson returned, pronounced Quinn's condition improved but ordered strict bed rest for at least 3 days. Gabriella reluctantly left to send word to the school board that she would be delayed in starting her teaching duties, but returned as soon as possible to Quinn's side. The next few days established a pattern. Gabriella would spend her mornings preparing lessons that a substitute teacher would deliver, then the afternoons and evenings with Quinn as he recovered. Their relationship deepened through these long conversations, building on the foundation laid during their first meeting on the trail. By the 4th day, Quinn was well enough to sit up in bed, chafing at the confinement. "Doc says I can get up tomorrow," he told Gabriella as she arrived with a basket of fresh biscuits from Mrs. Hendrick's kitchen. "Just in time, too. I'm about ready to climb out the window." She laughed, settling into her usual chair. "I can't picture you confined for long. You strike me as someone who needs open spaces to breathe." "Usually, yes," he agreed, watching her with warm eyes, "though lately I've been rethinking what makes me happy." On the 5th day, true to Dr. Peterson's promise, Quinn was allowed up. Gabriella arrived to find him dressed and standing by the window, looking out at the street below. He turned when she entered, and she was struck anew by how handsome he was, even pale from his injury and with his arm in a sling. "There you are," he said, smiling. "I was just thinking I might visit the schoolhouse today, see this classroom you've been telling me about." "Are you sure you're up to it?" she asked, concerned. "Absolutely. I've been cooped up too long." He offered her his good arm. "Would you do me the honor of escorting me, Miss Ellis?" They walked slowly through town, Quinn still weak but determined. Several townspeople stopped them to inquire after his health and congratulate him on thwarting the rustlers. Gabriella noticed how respected he was, how genuinely people seemed to care about his well-being. At the schoolhouse, she showed him her classroom, now inhabited by 20 students under the temporary guidance of Mrs. Foster. The children were curious about the tall cowboy with his arm in a sling, and Quinn answered their questions with patience and good humor. Afterward, they retreated to Gabriella's quarters for tea. Quinn seemed thoughtful as he surveyed her small but now more homey living space. "Something on your mind?" she asked, pouring the tea. Just thinking about the future, he replied. Doc says I won't be able to work cattle for at least 6 weeks. Shoulder needs time to heal properly. What will you do in the meantime? He looked directly at her, his gaze steady. That depends partly on you, Gabriella. Her heart skipped. On me. I've been offered a job as deputy marshal, he explained. Would mean staying in Tucson permanently instead of being on the trail so much. It's less pay than driving cattle, but more stable. And you're considering it because of me? She asked softly. Quinn set down his teacup and reached for her hand. I'm considering it because nearly dying makes a man think about what's important, and yes, you're part of that. He took a deep breath. I know it's fast, maybe too fast, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. He tugged gently on her hand, drawing her to stand before him. With some difficulty due to his injury, he lowered himself to one knee. Gabriella Ellis, I don't have much to offer but a cabin that needs work, a life that's sometimes dangerous, and a heart that's entirely yours. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Tears sprang to Gabriella's eyes. It was fast, impetuous even, but in her heart she knew her answer. From the moment he had found her dying on that trail and shared everything he had without hesitation, Quinn Dawson had shown her exactly the kind of man he was, the kind she wanted to spend her life with. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will. Quinn's face broke into a radiant smile as he rose to his feet and pulled her into a one-armed embrace. When their lips met, it was a promise of all that was to come, a future built on kindness, generosity, and love that had begun in the most desperate of circumstances. They were married 3 weeks later in the same small church where they had attended the social. The entire town seemed to turn out for the occasion, delighted by the romantic story of the school teacher rescued by the cowboy who had shared everything he had. Gabriella wore a new dress of ivory silk, a wedding gift from Samuel Weber, who insisted on standing in for her father. Quinn, fully recovered except for occasional stiffness in his shoulder, wore a new suit and the biggest smile anyone in Tucson had ever seen on him. After the ceremony, as they greeted well-wishers at the reception held in the schoolyard, Mrs. Hendricks approached them with tears in her eyes. I knew it from the first, she declared, embracing them both. The moment Quinn brought you to my door, Miss Ellis, Mrs. Dawson, now, I said to myself, that man's found his heart at last. Quinn's cabin, as he had warned, needed work, but together they transformed it over the following months. Gabriella continued teaching, while Quinn took on his duties as deputy marshal with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. Their life together wasn't always easy. The Arizona Territory in the 1880s remained a challenging place, with harsh weather, occasional lawlessness, and the everyday struggles of frontier life. But they faced each challenge together, drawing strength from the bond that had formed when a desperate woman had been saved by a cowboy willing to share everything he had. 1 year to the day after their first meeting, Quinn took Gabriella on a ride to the spot where he had found her on the trail. They sat beneath the shade of a mesquite tree, sharing a picnic lunch and memories. Sometimes I still can't believe my luck, Quinn said, watching her with the same wonder he had shown since that first day. If I'd taken a different trail that day. Gabriella touched his cheek gently. But you didn't. You were exactly where you needed to be when I needed you most. And I always will be, he promised, drawing her close. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Gabriella rested her head on her husband's shoulder and smiled. From desperate beginnings had grown a love as vast and enduring as the Arizona sky above them. A love built on the foundation of a simple, profound act of kindness, when a cowboy had shared everything he had with a woman who had nothing. 5 years later, the Dawson Ranch stood as a testament to hard work and perseverance. What had begun as Quinn's modest cabin had expanded into a proper home with a barn, corral, and small herd of cattle. Gabriella had given up teaching at the schoolhouse after the birth of their first child, a son they named Edward after her father, but she still tutored children from neighboring ranches a few days each week. Their second child, a daughter named Hope, had just celebrated her second birthday, and Gabriella had recently shared the news with Quinn that a third was on the way. Their life was full, sometimes challenging, but always rich with love. On this particular evening, as the children slept and Quinn sat on the porch mending a bridle, Gabriella joined him with 2 cups of coffee. "Letter came today," she said, handing him his cup. "From my aunt in Philadelphia." Quinn raised an eyebrow. "Good news, I hope." "She's finally accepted my invitation to visit." Gabriella smiled at his surprise. "Says she wants to meet her great-niece and nephew before she's too old to travel." Quinn set aside his work. "That's wonderful, though I wonder what a proper Philadelphia lady will make of our little ranch." "She'll see what I see," Gabriella replied confidently. "A beautiful home filled with love." She touched his hand. "She also sent this." From her pocket, she withdrew a small golden locket. Quinn recognized it immediately, the one containing her mother's portrait that had been stolen during the stagecoach robbery. "How did she get this?" he asked, astonished. "Apparently it turned up in a pawn shop in El Paso." The owner recognized the Ellis family crest engraved on the back and contacted my aunt. Gabriella's eyes shone with emotion. "It's the only thing I have left from before, from my old life." Quinn opened the locket carefully to reveal the tiny portrait inside. "She was beautiful like you," he observed. "Will you wear it again?" "I think I'll save it for our daughter," Gabriella decided. "A piece of her heritage to carry forward." Quinn nodded, understanding as always. He put his arm around her shoulders, and together they watched the sunset paint the desert landscape in brilliant hues. "You ever miss it?" he asked quietly. "Your life back east, I mean. The comforts, the society." Gabriella considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss certain things, books, music, conversations about art or politics, but that life." She shook her head. "It was like a beautiful cage. Here, despite all the hardships, I've found real freedom, real purpose." She turned to face him. "Real love." Quinn's eyes, still as kind and steady as the day he'd found her dying of thirst on the trail, held hers. "You know, I've never quite believed I deserved you," he admitted. "A cultured lady like yourself ending up with a rough cowboy who couldn't even offer you a proper roof at first." "Quinn Dawson," Gabriella said firmly, "you offered me everything you had when I had nothing. You gave without hesitation, without expecting anything in return." She touched his face gently. "That kind of generosity, that kind of heart, it's worth more than all the fine houses and fancy parties in Philadelphia." He kissed her then, still with the same tenderness that never failed to make her heart flutter, even after 5 years of marriage. Inside the house, one of the children stirred. Quinn stood, pulling Gabriella up with him. "Duty calls, Mrs. Dawson." "Indeed it does, Deputy Marshal Dawson," she replied with a smile. As they entered their home together, Gabriella reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this life. The stagecoach robbery that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been just the beginning. In losing everything she owned, she had found something far more valuable, a love born from kindness, strengthened through adversity, and built to last a lifetime. And it had all started with a simple act of sharing between 2 strangers on a desert trail. By their 10th anniversary, the Dawsons were well established in the community. Quinn had been elected sheriff of Tucson 3 years earlier, a position that suited his natural authority and strong sense of justice. Gabriella had reopened a small school on their property, teaching their own children along with others from nearby ranches and farms. Their family had grown to include 4 children now: Edward, Hope, Samuel, and little Grace, just learning to walk. The ranch prospered under Quinn's careful management and Gabriella's keen business sense. They weren't wealthy by Eastern standards, but they wanted for nothing that mattered. On the evening of their anniversary, after the children were asleep, Quinn surprised Gabriella with a small box wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked, smiling as she accepted it. "Open it and see," he encouraged, watching her face. Inside was a gold locket, larger than her mother's but similar in design. When she opened it, she found a tiny photograph of their family on one side, and on the other, a carefully pressed flower, a desert lily. "Quinn," she breathed, recognizing the significance immediately. "It's from near where I found you," he confirmed. "I go back every year on that day to give thanks for the most important moment of my life." Tears filled Gabriella's eyes. "You never told me that," he shrugged, still slightly uncomfortable with expressing sentiment even after all these years. "Some things a man keeps to himself, but I wanted you to know. I've never taken a single day with you for granted." Gabriella fastened the locket around her neck, feeling its weight settle against her heart. "Nor I with you," she said softly. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Gabriella reflected on how far they had come from that desperate day on the trail. The young woman who had been raised in luxury in Philadelphia would never have imagined finding such contentment in a life that included hauling water, chopping wood, and all the other daily labors of ranch life. Yet she had never been happier. "What are you thinking about?" Quinn asked, his voice low in the darkness. "About us. About how differently things might have turned out if you hadn't found me that day." His arm tightened around her. "I try not to think about that," he admitted. "The idea of you out there alone." He shook his head. "Providence was looking out for us both that day." "Do you remember what you first thought when you saw me?" she asked, curious. Quinn was quiet for a moment, remembering. "I thought you were a mirage at first," he finally said. "Then I thought you were the bravest person I'd ever seen." 3 days alone in that heat. Most men wouldn't have lasted that long. "I wasn't brave," Gabriella disagreed. "I was terrified and desperate." "That's what brave is," Quinn said firmly. "Being afraid but going on anyway because there's no other choice." His hand found hers in the darkness. "That's how I knew you'd do well out here. You already had the spirit for it, even if you didn't know it yet." As they drifted toward sleep, Gabriella thought about how right he was. She had found strength in herself she never knew existed, inspired in part by the man beside her who had shown her what true courage and generosity looked like. From their first meeting, when he had shared everything he had with a stranger in need, Quinn Dawson had exemplified the best qualities of the frontier spirit: resilience, resourcefulness, and an unfailing willingness to help others. In following his example, Gabriella had discovered those same qualities within herself. Together, they had built not just a home or a family, but a legacy of love and kindness that would endure long after they were gone. It was a legacy born from the simplest, yet most profound of human acts: the willingness to share what one has with those who have nothing. And as Gabriella fell asleep in the arms of the man who had saved her life in more ways than one, she knew that no matter what challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, just as they had from that very first day on the desert trail, when a cowboy had shared everything he had, and in doing so, found everything he needed.